I thought I understood the economy pretty well until I saw the extraordinary amount of money that the government is running outside the law. The president of the largest pension fund in the country was there, and he looked at me and he said, "You don't understand, it's too late." I said, "What do you mean it's too late?" He said, "It's too late. They've given up on the country, and they're going to move all the money out of the country starting in the fall." But what I later came to realize was what he was talking about was they were implementing a financial coup. They decided to move to a process where essentially the bankers controlled both fiscal and monetary policy. They were going to do it on the just do it method and lever up the debt, issue tons of debt, and suck all the money out the back door and essentially have a financial coup d'etat, which is exactly what I think has happened. Where they want to go is they want to go to an all-digital financial system with programmable money. If you look at programmable money, it's not a currency, it's a control system. Centrally, the rules can be made by the banks or the central banks where you can shop, who you can buy from, when you can shop, and your money can be turned off or negative interest rates can be applied. And essentially all the rules can be made and enforced through the money. Then that's not a currency, that's a slavery system. If you look at all the factions operating in Washington, there is nobody on our side. They are all trying to implement the control grid. And the question is, who's going to control it and who's going to make money on it?
This is Little by Little with Andy Schectman.
All right, everybody, welcome back to another episode. I'm really psyched for this one of Little by Little. I have with me today the amazing Catherine Austin Fitz. I think you'll all enjoy this. I'm looking forward to it. Catherine, welcome in. Thanks for being here. I'm so excited to finally get to chat with you. How you doing?
I know. I'm doing great. And as I said, I finally get to meet Andy after all these years.
Yeah, we have a lot of symmetry in people we know and in people that we speak to. And I've always wondered why the heck haven't our paths crossed sooner. I'm thrilled to have you here. I'm thrilled to maybe get to take you to dinner in a month or so when you're down this way. But I'm also very excited to hear what you have to say about some of the questions that are, I think, on my mind and maybe on others. So without further ado, again, thank you so much for coming here. Let me start by asking you just a basic who you are for listeners maybe who are meeting you for the first time. I know that you've worked on Wall Street. You served at HUD, overseeing the FHA, and you went on to build the Solari Report. Can you give us a short version of your journey, perhaps? And maybe was there a moment that convinced you that you'd spend your life studying how money and power really work?
So as a young child, I watched my neighborhood destroyed by narcotics trafficking and mortgage fraud. And every time I asked an adult sort of why this was happening, it always came back to money. So I thought, well, what is this money thing? And how can I figure out how money works in a neighborhood? I used to watch Andy. We had 4 boarded up, had foreclosed properties that were empty for 4 years. And we had a family of 6 across the street living in a 1-bedroom apartment. And I thought, this makes no sense. What is this money thing and why does it make no sense? So anyway, what I didn't understand was to understand how the money works in West Philadelphia, just in a 4-block area, you need to understand how all the money in the planet works. So I went to Wall Street. One of the reasons I went to the firm I went to was you could circulate and work in many different departments, because I wanted to know all the markets. And so literally I worked at Goldman Sachs for the summer, and then I worked at Dillon Read and became a partner. And I worked in almost every area in an investment bank. I loved investment banking. That's what I am really, is just an investment banker. And I finally realized, at some point, this is all rigged from Washington. I've got to go to Washington and figure out how the central bank and Treasury operate. And so I went to work in the first Bush administration as the Assistant Secretary of Housing. One of the reasons is because HUD has one of the greatest, outside of the Federal Reserve, HUD has one of the greatest databases of, financial interests in communities. So if you want to know how the money works in 3,100 counties in America, HUD's a great place to go. Anyway, so that was my career. And then I made the foolish mistake of trying to stop the mortgage fraud and ended up in litigation with the Department of Justice for many, many years. And in that process, it forced me to dig down and look at the covert economy and what was really going on. And, I thought I understood the economy pretty well until I saw, sort of the extraordinary amount of money that the government is running outside the law. I realized I didn't understand. And so I did all of that while I was litigating. And then when it was over, I decided to start the Solari Report. I love investment banking, but you can't go back into investment banking if you're going to tell the truth. And so I had to choose the truth or investment banking. And so I started an investment advisory firm, which now just does investment screens. I no longer do investment advisory. In the Solari Report, I immediately got a lot of clients, and they were all asking me the same question every week. And I thought I can't possibly answer the same question 50 times a week. So I ended up starting a podcast, and it grew into the Solari Report, and that's where I am today.
It's almost you can make a movie off of that.
No, they already did. It's called Enemy of the State, and it's already been made.
Yeah, yeah, I understand what you mean, but it's fascinating, and how dare you do something like try and put an end to mortgage fraud? But and I'm going to put this. I almost am embarrassed. When we were offline, you mentioned that you're in the cold state of Minnesota. That is my home state. I used to be very, very proud to be a Minnesotan, and Little House on the Prairie, Mary Tyler Moore.
Yeah.
Sleep with your doors unlocked. That was all true. I raised a family there. I spent 50 years there. We've had an office in Florida for 18 years, and in the midst of the beginning of Minnesota losing its mind, leading the nation's charge in defunding the police, letting the city literally burn down for 3 days before the mayor or the governor did anything to help it, I left and I came to Florida, and I haven't gone back. I'm almost embarrassed to admit that is where I am from after what we have seen. So in this light, you've said repeatedly that what we have in the United States is not just a financial problem, it's a governance problem. Well, I would agree with that.
Right.
And you go further to say almost like a bank robbery. I'd agree with that too, seeing what's going on in my home state.
Right.
Can you explain what you mean by that in plain terms, and just maybe how it shows up in real life other than what I just explained?
Yeah. So let me tell two ways of going at the question. The first is when I had a company in Washington, the company that was trying to stop the mortgage fraud. I discovered relational databases, and I realized, because if you go to the White House budget, you'll see, here's how the money works in housing. Here's how the money works in military. Here's how the money works in transportation. You don't see, here's how the money works in the jurisdiction from which you vote for political representation. So you don't see, here's how the money works in your congressional district. Here's how the money works in your county. Here's how the money works in the whatever your city council represents. And that's what you need. If you're going to hold your political representatives accountable, you need to see how the money works on a place-based basis. If the small businesses in a neighborhood are going to, sort of be successful together, you need to see how the money works around you, because the federal government money, directly or indirectly, is as much as 50% of the GDP of a county or a place. So we discovered relational databases, and we started to collect up all the federal data that was available publicly and put it in a database so people could basically look at a financial statement and a balance sheet for their jurisdiction. And what I discovered, because we started to simulate, well, okay, if we were just going to spend this money in a way that would make the neighborhood as wonderful as possible or the economy as successful as possible, how would we change it? And one of the things I discovered is the expense of central control is more than anybody can imagine. And the economy is very much suboptimized because the money is spent to buy political control or to implement control. It's not spent to make the economy wonderful. And anyway, so part of the litigation I had with the Department of Justice was they seized all that, the databases and software tool, and kept it under lock and key for many years because they didn't want that information coming out. One of the things it would show is there's an incredible amount of mortgage fraud. But what I will say is one of the reasons for my optimism is what I know is that a lot of our economy is driven by political control, and creating billionaires as opposed to making the economy as productive as possible. And if there was a way that could be found politically to change that, the opportunities are extraordinary. The second thing is I was part of my company had a subsidiary that had on its board some of the top pension fund countries in the pension funds in the country. And one of the things we were doing was working with them to understand what the pension funds could do, among other things, to achieve retirement for the boomers. The boomer generation was like a pig going through the snake demographically. And the question was, how do the pension funds make sure they have sufficient money for retirement? And so we did an analysis of what we could do if we could re-simulate and re-engineer all the government money just to create as much financial equity and financial income as possible. And we took Philadelphia. I grew up in Philadelphia, so we took the Philadelphia area. And I had a meeting with this board out at Safeguard Scientifics. There was a firm that was co-located from them. One of the members was on the board. And I showed them what was possible if we re-engineered the government money. And there was enormous opportunity to build, enormous financial equity capital gains. The pension funds could make a lot of money, sort of re-engineering how the federal budget worked in a way that would create a much more productive economy. And the president of the largest pension fund in the country was there, and he looked at me and he said, "You don't understand. This is what we had tried to do." He had been working with a group of activists as a young man. He said, "This is what we tried to do, and they were able to stop us." And I said very naively, "Well, you didn't have the internet. You couldn't get the learning speeds up locally high enough to sort of jump the curve." And then he froze and he looked at me and he said, "You don't understand. It's too late." I said, "What do you mean it's too late?" He said, "It's too late. They've given up on the country. They're going to move all the money out of the country starting in the fall." He said, "You've got to get to Nick Brady." Brady had been the chairman of the firm that I was a partner at on Wall Street, and then had become Secretary of the Treasury in the first Bush administration, and was one of the people you would loosely say was a leader in how the financial system got run. So he said, "You got to get to Nick." So, but I thought what he meant, Andy, was that we have been given a directive to reallocate the equity in the pension funds to emerging market investments, which made sense because you had much higher growth rates in Asia and the emerging markets than you did in the more mature economies. That's what I thought he meant. But then what happened at the beginning, he said they're moving all the money out starting in the fall. That fall was the beginning of fiscal 1998, when enormous amounts of money started to go missing from my old agency, HUD, as well as the Department of Defense. And what I later came to believe, we have an entire website just dedicated to presenting all the documents and analysis on this. It's at missingmoney.solari.com. But what I later came to realize was what he was talking about was they were implementing a financial coup. They had given up on a system where the bankers control monetary policy and the people's representatives control fiscal policy, and decided to move to a process where essentially the bankers controlled both fiscal and monetary policy. And they were not going to do it by, presenting new legislation to change things. They were going to do it on the just do it method and lever up the debt, issue tons of debt, and suck all the money out the back door, and essentially have a financial coup d'etat, which is exactly what I think has happened.
Wow. And enter in the central bank digital currency that's incredible. Before we get to the digital surveillance state, which I know you are so adept at, let's try and find out where we are in the broader cycle first, kind of to what you're just saying,
Right.
In terms of, where are we in this monetary regime? Have we slipped into a new one already, or are we at the very end, late stage, if you will, version of the old one?
So we're both. We're in that in between phase, which is called a reset. So for the central banking warfare model, which is a James Turk expression, started about 500 years ago, and every 80 to 120 years we have a reset. It's almost as though the central bankers say, "Okay, we got to flush the system." Oftentimes you move to a new currency. So the last time we had a reset was essentially after World War One, we went to a duopoly between sterling and the dollar, and then after World War II, we went to just the dollar system. But essentially, what happened was the central bankers met in August of 2019, as they do every summer under the auspices of the Kansas Fed, and reviewed a plan that had been prepared by a group of retired central bankers working through the BlackRock Investment Institute called the Going Direct Reset. And if you go to Solari, we have a large wrap up and we have summaries and other information that John Titus did on the Going Direct. So we have very detailed analysis of what they met on. And these are all published. They published this material. It's all published. But we started into a reset. And part of the thing you need to do in a reset, or part of the thing that happened, was they injected $5 trillion directly into the economy on the Going Direct Reset, and using the pandemic as the official reason. But what you saw happen in the pandemic was you shut down Main Street and injected $5 trillion into the economy directly, so that many of the larger players. So part of shutting down Main Street was you said that essentially publicly traded stocks, companies who had publicly traded stocks, were considered essential. So they were allowed to stay open. Small business, small farms were shut down, which meant you could shift the market share out of the little guys very cheaply into the big guys. And the big guys had trillions of dollars to go shopping to pick up assets cheap. And that led to a tremendous consolidation within the economy. So one number I've seen said 35% of small business were either shut down or bankrupted. I know in San Francisco, I was told it was 49%, and you created 500 plus new billionaires. But there was an enormous consolidation of wealth into the publicly traded stocks, and basically, going into including the online businesses. So we are in that reset, and that reset continues, and that centralization has been going on really since 1980, and the sort of a lot of different federal policies designed to centralize economic and political control. Now, where they want to go is they want to go to an all-digital financial system with programmable money. And programmable money can be a CBDC, which is issued by the central bank, but it can also be a stablecoin, which is issued by essentially the banks who own the central bank. And programmable money can even work with asset tokens. The Clarity Act has passed in the House, and the Senate version is now being debated. And there are many big, there are many big issues being debated in that, which could have a very dramatic impact on the federal government. So what they're pushing for is to end currency as we know it. So if you look at programmable money, it's not a currency, it's a control system. So if you have, whether it's a credit card or you have digital money of various kinds, but centrally the rules can be made by the banks or the central banks, where you can shop, who you can buy from, when you can shop, and your money can be turned off or negative interest rates can be applied. Taxation can be decided by the bankers, so no representation. And essentially all the rules can be made and enforced through the money. Then that's not a currency, that's a slavery system.
Yeah, you're the kind of person I need to sit down and drink a bottle of wine with and get deep into the weeds with this, because, literally, it almost makes the hair stand up on your arms. I remember during the Biden administration with Lael Brainerd and her intention to roll out a CBDC, working on it with MIT. And there was another gal, and I forgot her name, but she came out and talked about just what you said, that, that these tools would be able to give money, programmable money, that would have an expiration date in order to, in essence, inject some sort of monetary inflation into the system. Or, as you say, pull it out, even though it wouldn't be popular, she said, if we needed to cool things down. Heavy, to say the least. And that brings me to, the present, the Genius Act, which I know you're familiar with. And this became law in 25 and is slated to go into effect in very early 27 at the latest. And to your point, as I read it, now again, the difference between, as you eloquently stated, between a CBDC, a central bank digital currency, and a stable coin, which is part of the Genius Act, is issued by private enterprise. And as I read it, it brings stable coins into the regulated system with KYC, know your client, AML, anti-money laundering, so who you are, where'd you get your money, and one of the ones that I found interesting, I didn't know about, is KYT, know your transaction. So it has these exceptions built into it, but it doesn't clearly prohibit programmability. And I know that's a big deal
Right.
to you.
So,
So
yes.
real quick, just to frame this question, because I can't wait to hear what you want to say about it. If stablecoins, if artificial intelligence, if the digital ID and digital money converge, are we looking at the early architecture of digital control system? And what should people know about this
Oh, no,
to
we're
know
looking
it's for real?
at architecture. You're in the trap. Once you have a digital ID, the local hardware and software infrastructure, which we haven't talked about, but we can, and you combine it with programmable money, and you don't need it to be called programmable money. So a stablecoin, if you look at the pipe, under the Genius Act, all the stablecoin issuers have to plug into the pipe that comes in through Treasury. Now, Treasury is describing that as, know your customer and money laundering and legitimate, sort of white collar crime or financial crime. But if you look at that pipe, the way they've designed it, it's designed absolutely to implement programmable money. Now, they say that's not their intention. Here's what's interesting. If their intention is to make it that way, they should specifically prohibit that in the law. And twice now, Congress has been promised to pass the president's executive order as legislation saying outlawing CBDC. And twice now, Johnson has reneged on his promise to do that. And in fact, the Clarity Act has a provision outlawing CBDC, and the Senate discussion draft. Senate doesn't have a filed bill; they have a discussion draft called the Responsible Financial Innovation Responsible Financial Innovation Act. It's specifically pulled out of the Senate version, and so we have now seen 3 efforts to protect the right of the central bank to do a central bank digital currency, despite, and that's an abrogation of, in my opinion, of both the president's and the speaker's promises.
Let me ask you a question, and this is kind of popping up in my head. So, do you think that the Genius Act, maybe we'll relate this to President Kennedy trying to neuter some of the power of the Federal Reserve by giving money creation back to the Treasury? Do you see what Trump is trying to do here? In other words, I'm trying to decide, is he the Trojan horse or is he riding on the Trojan horse? Do you see him, by having the stablecoin bill where the money is in essence issued and interest rate policy is more dictated by the Treasury than by the Federal Reserve? Is it the Federal Reserve banks that are pushing back against this? Is Trump the good guy in all of this? Is my question, or do you view him as part of a puppet of a bigger play?
So we at Solari have a collection it's called the Fast Approaching Digital Control Grid. And it is a collection that we update every week of everything the federal government is doing, administration and Congress, to implement a control grid. And in my opinion, Trump was put into the White House to persuade conservatives to go along with a control grid. And what you need to understand is if you look at all the factions operating in Washington, there is nobody on our side. They are all trying to implement the control grid. And the question is, who's going to control it and who's going to make money on it? So is Trump our friend? Absolutely not. And if you look at the extraordinary effort that the administration has made to build the control grid, the local hardware and software infrastructure, billions of dollars. So let me step and talk about the local infrastructure.
Please
and then
do.
Come back to this side, Andy. Let me explain what AI is really good at. So there's a lot of crazy, magical, stupid thinking on AI. But one of the things I will say about AI, it's absolutely superb at implementing or tracking things that can be expressed mathematically. So its ability to collect and process huge amounts of data like surveillance data, where you're trying to implement spatial control or financial control, it's absolutely fantastic at. Okay. And if you look at all the data centers we're building all over the country, they are there for control. That's what they do. They're not there to make businesses. I always laugh when the guys say, oh, we poured all this money into AI and it's not making companies more productive. Well, of course, it's not meant to make companies more productive. It's meant to make sure that the leadership has complete control, spatial control and financial control. I just noted Congressman Massey is now fighting to kill the switch in your car. Kill the car switch. So they've got new items in the car that your car can be turned off, remotely, and so he's trying to kill the kill switch. But that gets back to spatial control. And if everybody's an electric car and you can kill the switch, there you go. You've got total control of movements and money.
Wow. Yeah. You paint a scary picture. No question. So maybe let's shift gears a little bit, unless there's something else that you would like to go on to talk about, because this is very important. I focus a lot on the Genius Act, and I agree with you. It's very important. Are we missing something? Did we not cover?
Yeah, so there's something on the stable coins you need to understand.
Please.
Or two things. One is stable coins are more dangerous kind of programmable money than CBDC. So the federal government is a creature of Congress. It was created by Congress. It's under Congress's jurisdiction. And it has very clear public policy mandates, okay, and obligation to disclose. If you allow instead the equivalent of a CBDC to be done privately, it's much easier to keep lots of information and data secret, including detail about what you're doing with that data. Okay? So, and there's two steps away from congressional jurisdiction. So stablecoin is the more dangerous form of CBDC, which is why we have model legislation designed to stop programmable money of any kind, because the states have the power to stop this if they choose. Okay, that's number one. Number two, the debate right now that is holding up the passage of the Clarity Act, or the Senate version thereof, is a debate between essentially the private fintech firms and the banks about whether or not stablecoins will be able to issue rewards or pay interest to the holder. Now, let me explain why this is so important. One of the videos, we have lots of video shorts at Solari, which are great to explain all these things. I'm a great believer in trying to, use a 1-minute video short to explain a phenomenon. But the video short I used to explain stablecoins is a software developer, a crypto guy, explaining how everybody in the world would love to be on the dollar, and we're going to issue tons of stablecoins, and then everybody all around the world is going to get off of their local currency and get on to stablecoins, which is essentially like trading a little treasury bill. So it's like using a tiny bit of treasury bill to trade with. And what he's anticipating is a giant sucking sound of money out of local banking systems all over the world, in Ecuador and Bolivia, in Minnesota, in Tennessee, out of the local banking and the local currency into crypto stablecoins, right? Now, go back. I don't know if you remember in 1989 after the wall came down, it was 1989 or 90, and the Berlin Wall came down, and there was great discussion. I was in Washington, great discussion about how it was going to take 10 years, and we had to have lots of meetings and talk about how we were going to unify East Germany and West Germany. And the German chancellor just announced a very sweet premium for the East German currency. And everybody in East Germany came into the Deutsche Mark, and that was it. The country was unified overnight through the currency. Now, what these guys are hoping to do is dramatically extend dollar dominance by basically creating a vehicle through your smartphone and your mobile phone, through Google Pay and Apple Pay, to get everybody on the planet using dollars instead of their local currency.
So the question that I have for you on that sucking sound, and I would agree with it, except if I'm not mistaken, the Clarity Act says that the interest attached to said treasuries is not transferable to the holder of the dollars, or which is being backed by stable coins. It's the issuer who gets to keep it, not the recipient.
Right.
Um,
And
so
that's
is that what they're trying? I mean, is that a maybe a roadblock to that sucking sound?
That's a huge roadblock to that sucking sound, and that is why they had anticipated passing the Senate version by the end of January, and in fact, the whole thing is blown up, and there was a headline the other day that the White House may pull their support because the banks and the non-banks are in huge loggerhead about whether or not interest can be paid and reward. It's not just interest, it's rewards too. And that's why this is such a big issue. So there are two issues you want to keep in mind when you look at what's going on. One is the programmable money, and one is the whether or not interest can be paid, and who's going to be dominant in this market. Is it going to be the banks? Now, if interest can't be paid, my prediction is it's the New York Fed and the big Fed banks who are going to dominate this market, including globally. But if the fintechs can offer rewards and interest, they can outcompete, and the giant sucking sound will happen. So the issue is, will the banks win and do a giant sucking sound on everybody else's banking system, or will fintech win and do a giant sucking sound on the banks? Now, understand the Clarity Act also addresses asset tokens, okay? And asset tokens, Larry Fink has said publicly, and Paul Atkins, the chairman of SEC, has said all securities will be traded using asset tokens, okay? Which means no privacy on all your asset token or all your securities trades. But Atkins the other day said in an interview that this was all going to happen within 2 years, which frankly, in my mind, is mind-boggling. One of the things that's never been made clear, not SEC, not BlackRock, anybody, is exactly how you're going to associate an existing stock or bond with securities. Now, crypto, as you know, Andy, is only about $4 trillion. But when you talk about the securities market, you're talking about, $250 trillion globally. And the idea of getting all these on blockchains, all I can say is I don't think there's enough geothermal energy on the planet to do this. So you have a group of people who are talking their book and talking about wildly fantastic things. You would need to bring out and make legal breakthrough energy to make this all work. And I can't say they're not going to do it, but who knows?
Yeah, it's just mind-boggling. And I would think that, if one would believe that the powers that be that are moving us towards a CBDC world, well, they would want interest to be paid, because and maybe I'm wrong, but I always thought part of the premise of a CBDC first and foremost would be to shrink all of the regional and the local banks into just a handful of big primary banks. Right. That would be the benefactor. Would you agree with that?
Yes, I agree. And one of the reasons you talk to treasurers, state treasurers all over the country, and the reason they're sending all their money to New York is because those banks can offer them a higher interest. And it's terrible because ultimately it's destroying their tax base.
Wow.
So, yeah, it's now one thing I do want to say, and I think it's very important to relate this to what's happening in the gold and silver markets.
Please.
I think one of the most important things happening, you are very quietly seeing now a movement of institutional investors and sophisticated investors away from the US. And part of it is, if you look at the discussion of what they're trying to do with programmable money and with asset tokenization, you get the feeling that the American financial system is no longer under adult supervision. And I do think that is having an influence on people wanting physical delivery of gold and silver.
Yeah, in fact, it's funny because my next question I was going to ask you, I'll read it to you. Do you see the rise in gold primarily as, and I know you say no to this, as a reaction to inflation, or something more structural, like a loss of trust and geopolitical risk, or even a signal from the plumbing of the financial system is breaking, kind of like you turn on the water and you hear the knocking in the walls. So in essence, what you're saying is that there are people who understand. I guess what you're saying is that they understand that something is very wrong with the plumbing of this system, and that's why they're prioritizing physical delivery. But the amount of gold that has been delivered on the COMEX over the last 15 months is off the charts, and
Right.
silver. So what does that say to you? Are people who know what's going on front running what's coming?
So I divide precious metal investment into a core position and an investment position. So the core position is central bank insurance. It's for the worst case. So I always say have enough gold to bribe the border guards. Okay. So your core position is, and we have a great article at Solari about how to calculate the two positions, because people always say, what percentage should I have? And my attitude is, how many people do you want to be responsible for in the worst case? How much do you need per person, at a purchase parity, and then multiply that out. And that's your core position. So, anyway, but you can go read that and calculate. But then your investment position is very different. So I think in gold, the demand for physical reflects a demand for core position. Okay. And not just by individuals, but by institutions and businesses. Silver is a very different story because you have so much growing industrial demand for silver, and they have to take physical delivery. Right? You can't use silver paper to build a data center. Okay, so part of it is the industrial demand, including national security issues. But then also, if you're going to monetize gold, being driven by the people wanting more and more core position, silver ultimately is going to be monetized too. It'll lag, but but it's coming in. They want physical. And if you look at the leverage in this, the paper to silver leverage is much greater than gold. So for 2 years, you probably don't know this. I'm asked about gold, and I just say I'm buying silver. And people keep saying, "Why are you buying silver?" And it's on sale. I'm buying silver because it's on sale. And so the other day, I kept saying to our team, I said, "I think the sale's over." But we knew at some point that leverage was between paper and whatever. Anyway, so let me keep going. The investment position, the miners have clearly lagged, so they're catching up. But then finally, people are beginning to realize, inflation is not going away. There are many reasons why it could get worse, and they need to protect themselves. And so they're going to the trouble of educating themselves. For somebody who's never done precious metals, it's a big education. And so, so people are saying, okay, inflation's not going away. I'm going to take the time to do the education. And so I think that's a major factor in the investment part of it. Anyway, so it's complicated, but if you look at all the factors, we are clearly in I would call it the end of the first phase of a long-term bull market in gold and silver. Now, there are many things that could drive the price way down. A pandemic or a war is very deflationary, as you know, and can drive the price way down. But I think the bull market has quite a ways to run.
You talk about silver, and I would agree. I mean, in terms of it being on sale, certainly seeing it rise, almost 200% in the last year is evidence of that. Heck, in May it was $35, and here we are at 95. So it's certainly that would support your thesis. The December delivery contract, when you talk about who's standing for delivery, was the largest delivery into COMEX on a December in the history of the market since 1974. About 68 million ounces were delivered. And then just in the first couple of weeks.
68 million of silver?
Yes, onto COMEX. And then you look at just the last couple of weeks here in January, we're approaching 40 million ounces. So 110 million ounces have been delivered onto COMEX. Someone's standing for delivery over the last 40 days. Who's doing this? And I've been screaming this for the past year, since since he won the election in November of last year, every single month we see billions upon billions upon billions upon billions of dollars of gold and silver delivered into New York. Someone is front running what is coming, whether it be industrial or more. Of course, this is all preceded and now alongside the classification of silver being a critical mineral by the U.S. government.
Well, as soon as Trump announced Stargate, this was a no-brainer.
Yeah. No, I agree with you. And I'm glad that your listeners got to benefit from that. Honestly, you were one of the most fascinating people I've ever talked to. And I am going to hopefully get you to come out to dinner with me when you come in town.
No, we will definitely have, dinner.
I hope so, because I got a lot I want to ask you, but I'm going to ask you one more question in respect of your time. So let's just zoom out a little bit. Do you think we're moving toward a world where, and this is one that's very close, near and dear to me, to what I talk about every day, to a world where the dollar's power is preserved through tighter surveillance and compliance, or maybe towards a world where dollar dominance fades as countries around the world start to route their own trade using their own digital settlement systems, and instead of using treasuries as their reserve, they're using gold as an alternative reserve asset to treasuries. Do you think that, and if so, is there a key tell that we can be looking at to see which road we're on?
So I'm a great believer in scenario planning, where you have multiple scenarios. So I can come up with scenarios where the dollar maintains a very significant market share, but it's still, it never regains its dominance. So I can come up with scenarios. I think the more likely scenario right now, given where we're headed, is a continued de-dollarization, but it's still going to continue to be slow. And it's very important for anyone dealing with a financial system in any capacity to understand the variables that can drive those different scenarios and to be prepared as you watch those variables to succeed either way it goes. But I think if you look at a lot of the plans that the dollar-based system has to maintain dominance, if they all happen and come true, yes, it's possible they can extend dollar dominance for quite a bit longer. But I think the chances that they will succeed are relatively small. And my fear is not that they're doing the control grid so that they can extend the extent to which we've all enjoyed the subsidy of having the reserve currency. I think they want to have the control they need to essentially plunder what's left.
Yeah, so, I kind of believe the latter as well. And you said slowly, that that's kind of the name of my show, little by little, by little by little by little by little, and bang, all at once. And do we get to an all at once moment in one of your scenarios?
So here's my vision of this thing. I think the people building the control grid will fail. And it's a much longer, I'm happy to come back and talk about why.
That'll be part 2. Absolutely. If you would indulge me, I would love to.
After we have dinner,
set the teaser.
We have to chew through this together. But
fine.
I think they're going to fail. And my job and your job, the job we've both been doing all along, is to try and make sure that our audience and our members and subscribers and customers are some of the ones standing. So there is so much that every person and family can do to both improve your chances of success, no matter which way this goes, and do it in a way that helps us all get through. Because what we need to do is support freedom and not support tyranny. Okay. And so we want to support freedom, but we also want to support freedom in a way that we avoid tyranny and don't get killed by it. So right. I'm a great believer in ducking at the right time. So, right. so we want to thrive through it, and we want our fellow man to thrive through it. And so there's a great deal we can do to make sure the freedom team is successful and tyranny doesn't have its way.
You are a very cool lady. You are a patriot. You should be classified as a hero. because the things that you are doing and saying at the very highest level, you've been to the top, and exposing this stuff takes great amount of courage, and you do it with a lot of class and integrity, and I admire it very much. I'm so thrilled that you came on, and we will pick up where we left off. To close, Catherine, what is the best way? I think you've already highlighted it, but and we'll make a link to the Solari Report.
Okay.
What is the best way for people to follow your work? Are there any other platforms other than? Are you on X? Do you do
So
other things?
we're on X and social media, as are increasing numbers of people imitating me.
Right, me too.
I just got a wonderful, we do a show called Ask Catherine and the Solari Team every week, and somebody just wrote this long rant screaming at me for saying something I never said. It was one of the fake accounts. It was
Yeah.
pretty funny. Anyway, so we're all going to have to learn to deal with the fake accounts. But the best way is to come to Solari. We have a lot of public information. We have a public newsletter. You can get to know us and try things, and then we'd love to have you as a subscriber. But all the good stuff is really at Solari. We have a Substack where we do a lot to promote cash, because one of the most important things, Andy, that we can all do is keep our analog system strong. So, buy bullion, have cash, be prepared to deal non-digitally. And that is so important.
Yeah, I've told my kids, Dad, can I have some money? Yeah, here's $50. No. I don't want that money. Can you put it in my Apple Pay? I said, you got 5 seconds to take this $50 bill or get nothing. And that's big to me. I'm very big about cash, and I try to use cash everywhere. And it's becoming harder, but I love what you're saying, and I try and espouse those same virtues. I can't thank you enough for coming on. Again, you're fascinating, and I can't wait to pick up where we left off. I wish you the very, very best, and can't wait to see you in person down here in Florida when you make it on down. But again, Catherine, honestly, thank you so much for coming on, and look forward to doing it with you again real soon.
You have a great day.
You too.
This is Little by Little with Andy Schectman.